All right, so welcome to week 4 of Basics to Build On. We're going to ditch the dubbing this time and just stick with 3 materials, the turkey tail, the peacock herl, and wire. And we're going to build 4 patterns. Basically, we're going to kind of improve on a mayfly nymph each time just a little bit. First pattern we're going to tie is what's known as a gray goose emerger. The only difference is we're not going to use gray goose and we're not going to use a curved hook. This is the hook that it's normally tied on, or some similar shape at least. But you can tie it on a straight shank. This is an Fly Fisher's International pattern for their bronze level tying award. And the reason they call it a gray goose is because the original material is gray goose shoulder. So I'm just kind of showing you this because this is what it looks like. You can, if you're taking a walk down at the park, if you got geese around, keep your eyes open for this, and it's a good material. A little bit harder to find in fly shops, but boy, it's a really good material to do bodies with. So, without further ado, let's do. We're going to use the turkey tail in its place, which I believe is the FFI approved substitute for the gray goose. So anyway, let's get cracking. I've got a size 12 hook in my vise, times 1 long. I've got my 6/0 black thread. You can play around with this a little bit. You probably wouldn't want to go bigger than a 10, but you can take this down to like an 18 or 20 if you wanted to. It's fairly simple. We're just going to start our thread about a 1.5 buck width behind the eye. I'm just going to take off my tag right there. And there's really 2 ways you can do this. Well, 3. You can tie your wire in first, or your body in first, and then your wire. You can tie your wire in at the back and bring it forward. I'll leave that up to you. At this point, you want to start experimenting with some of that stuff to see what works best for you. So play around with it on your different tie-in points. So just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and start up front. We'll just tie the body material in right away. I've got about 6 fibers here of turkey tail. I'm going to tie this in right on top of the hook shank. We're going to take it back to about the barb. We're going to trim this out. If you're more comfortable tying your wire in up front and bringing it back, you can actually just go ahead and bring your wire up front if you want. Or if you want to try, because we haven't done this yet, but if you want to try tying your wire in directly at the back, you can do that too. Whoa, don't want the hook point. We do want to keep that wire directly underneath on this one. And we talk real quick about directional wrapping. So directional wrapping is kind of another element of thread control. We've talked about open thread and closed thread. For something like this, since my material's on the bottom, I think we kind of touched on it loosely last week. Kind of go loose around the material, in this case the wire, tied over the top. Loose, in this case underneath, tied over the top. You can do that if your material's on the top, side, wherever it is. But pay attention to that, and it'll help you keep from having to stop and readjust all your material constantly. Lost it right there at the very end. Okay, so as we've done before, since this is going to be our body, you may want to swoop your feathers to the front or back until you can get them to lay flat for you. And we're just going to wrap our body forward. We want touching turns with the material all the way up. Starting to separate on me just a little bit. Don't be afraid to get your fingers involved to close the gap. That's pretty good. And we're going to counter rib this, so just again make sure you remember which way you wrapped your body. And we want about 5 evenly spaced turns in here. Again, use your bodkin like we've done in previous weeks if you need to kind of just keep working on your distance, but your gap for your wire. Okay, now that that's tied in, we can trim this out, or helicopter it off. And we'll trim out the leftovers here. So we should be looking about like that. It's very similar to a PTN, which we'll tie next, except we won't be using pheasant tail, we'll be using turkey tail. So at this point, if you got some scraps left over to build a wing case, you can use your scraps. I'll just go ahead and do that here so I don't have to cut off a new piece. And we're going to tie it in directly on top. You want to make sure it stays flat. I'm going to work back into my body just a fuzz, leaving it so it's directly on top like so. This is a super, super easy pattern to tie. It's a great beginner pattern. And I'm going to go back to my peacock herl. I'm going to trim out about the front inch or inch and a half. Just going to line that right on top, making sure it's even with everything that I've left up front. You know, you want to make sure you've got about a bodkin width still behind the eye so we've got room to build our head. And is that not going to sit for me? It didn't want to sit. I'll pinch wrap it. Just going to tie that in like so. We really only need 2 here again, so I'm going to start with 2, and I've got my 2 reserves. And I'm just going to start twisting it together. Again, don't over twist this. And twist enough to put a couple of turns in. Twist up some more. Again, all we're trying to do is just reinforce our herl to get it to hold up longer. Oh, slid forward. We can fix that though. No problem. Just kind of undo it, put it back where we want it. You can use hackle pliers here to twist these stems. You just gotta be a little bit more careful because the hackle pliers add that weight, and it kind of it's real easy to add too much torque to it. And then snap your peacock herl. So I just usually just twist them together with my fingers, get a couple wraps in and move on. That one wanted to stack pretty well right there. Try to just make this full. You can groom it back. Help get the kind of that little bushy effect. Get it looking good. We're really almost done with this thing here. Other than about another turn or 2. Okay. I'm going to bring that herl to my front side again. I can just take my 1 turn over, do 1 to the back, maybe 2, fold it to the rear. One thing you want to start paying attention to on this though is having your little hairs stick out. Just lick your fingers, sneak a thread wrap in to get rid of them. That might be easier said than done, but it's definitely doable. Okay, now that we have that, we can just pop these off. I'll pop the spares off and save them for another fly. Missed that one right there. And now we're just going to bring our wing case forward. We want it to be directly over the front of the eye. Sneak my hand around. Just going to place in a few turns and reverse the turkey tail fibers. I'm going to work my thread back into my thorax. And I'm going to use my fingernail clippers here just because I can get a much closer cut. And then at this point we can just whip finish going forward to right behind the eye to complete the head. Try to get touching turns and make sure your head looks nice here. Pull tight. It's not wanting to. There it goes. Boy, that thread really didn't want to give up the grip. And so there it is. And that's really all there is to it. So now we can move over and we'll do a turkey tail version of a pheasant tail nymph. Okay, so let's move into doing a pheasant tail nymph using turkey tail. Turkey tail is a very popular choice as a substitute for pheasant tail. And so it's kind of a natural fit for the materials we've been using for this session. So I'm going to start my jam knot about a bodkin width behind the eye. I'm going to trim out. And here you got a little bit of liberty to kind of pick and choose what you want to put in first. I'm going to go ahead and put my wire in first here on the front side. Slide it up so that it lines up with where my initial thread wraps were. Excuse me. Got a frog in my throat. And then we can wrap this back. If you're not comfortable doing it this way, you can tie it in from the back if you prefer that. Some of your tie-in points don't necessarily matter so much. I shouldn't say points, but when you're tying the material in, doesn't sometimes matter as much. This is one of those times. As long as the fly turns out the same, you really need to gravitate towards what's comfortable for you. So with pheasant tail, a lot of the times, most of the time actually, it's going to have what's called mottling. And it's just basically this little speckled stuff. And so I'm going to try to duplicate that a little bit with the turkey tail fibers. So I'm going to get, it's probably a couple fibers too many, but I'm going to pull out about 4 or 5 fibers. And again, make sure you're covering all this the same way. Pull them directly off to the side, pinch close to the stem. Remove the stem from the barbs, not the barbs from the stem. And then that should keep your points relatively, keep the tips relatively squared. And so for this, I want to have something, about the length of the shank of the hook for the tail. I'm going to place it directly on top. I need to trim my fingernails. Something got caught and I didn't want to break my thread. Just going to place it directly on top. I've just got one wrap over to see if it's where I like it. And you can adjust your thread a little bit if you need to. I know we haven't talked about that, but these are some of the things you want to move forward and progress with and pay attention to. So we're going to take this forward. So we'll go loose over the top, tie it under the bottom, loose over the top, tie it under the bottom. This is directional wrapping. So it'll help keep your material more in one place. You may have to adjust it a little bit, but it helps build symmetry on the body. Now some people will actually just put a few wraps in and then just use this piece to wrap the body forward. And you can 100% do that if that's what you want to do and try. So just put a quick little 2 turns in the back, bring your thread forward and start to wrap it. If it starts to slip on you, do a 3-turn tie-in like we've talked about at that point. So next I'm going to move into some longer fibers. I'll get 5 or 6. But this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave about a half a hook shank sticking out the front, maybe 3/4 of a hook shank sticking out the front, and we're not going to trim it off. So I'm just going to put it directly on top. We're going to leave it there. And now we can wrap back. These are going to be our legs. I'll just bring this back to where the tail started. And now we can come back forward. I know this is building up a thick underbody, so where you can cut thread wraps out and traveling back and forth, that's usually not such a bad thing. So we're going to kind of come up into the thorax area. I'm going to swing my feathers around so I can get them flat. There we go. I decided they wanted to flatten out coming forward this time. And again, because we're going to put a counter rib in to protect this material and make sure it stays, the body stays our body. Just remember which way you're going. I'm coming this way, so my wire is going to come down and underneath and up and around. Oops. Again, pull to the front of your thread. All you got to do is tighten down, put one wrap in, just like we've been doing, and it'll catch it. I'll tie this in going forward. And actually, if you can collect this and get it on top of the hook shank, you can actually just use this for your wing case. Mine's starting to split out on me a little bit, but we can kind of fix that a little bit. So we'll go ahead and do that this time, just so you can see it done. And so I'm going to bring my counter rib, I'm just going to bring the rib in the counter direction, the opposite direction, so that it performs the counter rib. Again, we're looking for 4 to 6 turns, just like have been for the last few weeks. Just going to carry that through. Same thing. I'm going to work my thread back. Now I can helicopter out my wire. I'm going to take my thread just back into the body a little bit. And now what I can do is I can actually turn this to the side and start to take my thumb and flatten this out. And you may have to kind of do a squirrely angle to get this to lay flat. See, I'll give you an example using my fly. Mine tied off on my tire side up front. And so by reversing that angle, taking it back the other direction, after one wrap I can kind of loosen up, get it centered where I want it so that it's directly over the body like so, and now I have effectively got my wing case in there. So for the thorax area, we're just going to use some peacock herl. But you can use, if you wanted to, you can use dubbing. I believe the original actually just used pheasant tail. It just used more pheasant tail, if I remember correctly. It starts to get hard to remember all the different flies and the way they've been tied over the years. It's just hard to keep track of all the patterns. And again, nothing changes. I'm just going to cut off about an inch or inch and a half of the front. I'm going to line it up to right behind where the legs start. And I can just tie this in coming forward. Stopping at the legs. Now that kind of split for me just perfect. I was going to say though, if you haven't got these to split apart yet, you may need to back a wrap or two off. But try to separate these so that we can fold them over and send them to the back. These ones are going to be a little bit longer than I normally have them, but that's okay. I don't perform this technique super often. I just don't tie this pattern very often. And again, we're just going to take 2, twist it up. So I know this kind of gets a little boring, or seemingly boring. But again, remember, the idea behind this session and this set of classes is to get such a firm grasp on the way that some of these things are done that you never need to revisit this again. And by the end of the 6 weeks, you're moving from beginner nymph tire to hopefully more of an intermediate nymph tire, where you're able to start taking on things like collars and soft hackles and things of that nature. Because once you have all this stuff down where you don't have to think about it, you can move on and start thinking about whatever it is that you want to do next. And it's not just nymphs either. A lot of these techniques are used in dry flies for trout, grayling. I mean, a lot of these techniques are used in salmon fly tying. So it's not just these little trout flies that these apply to. It's really across the board. And why I've always said, learn these techniques and then just look at the pattern and decide if you want to tie it or not. And again, the goal is that you, maybe not a pro, but you have a fairly good idea just by looking at a picture in a book or magazine of how it's tied. So again, I'm just going to bring it same way we always done, right in front of the thread, couple to the back, and reverse that peacock curl going to the back. Oh, my vise is coming loose. Now you can trim out these here, save those for another fly. Now you've got two options here. You can bring your legs back first if you want. I actually kind of like to bring my wing case over first. So I'm just going to pull that wing case. You want to try to get it nice and flat. If you've got material crossing over, try to get rid of it and flatten it back out so that it's straight. If you can. If not, I mean, it's not the end of the world here. It's just a fly. Gives you something to practice. And if you come up to a stumbling block on some of these, just practice that technique until you get it down. It'll make your life a whole lot easier in the long run. I promise you that one. Okay, and now with the head, I'm just going to take my fingers and fold everything to the back. If you've got a bodkin, it's got a little hole in it. What you can do is you can actually just take this and start to push them. Now you want those legs kind of underneath and down to the side, or just directly out the side is fine. Now we can just trap everything at one time. And as I work back, now those legs are in place. Oh, got a bunch of... I need to clean my desk, man. Everything's just getting clogged up there. Okay, I kind of like mine right about there. And just kind of remember this technique because we're going to use it again here in just a few minutes. Now with all my material reversed, I can bring in my fingernail clippers. And again, on something like this, I like to wet whip these. Just meaning I'm going to take a little bit of super glue, put it directly on my thread, whip finish to the front, and we'll call this one done. If you get good at doing these, you should be able to knock one out in 5 to 7 minutes if you take your time. There we go. And there you go. That's a PTN using turkey tail. Fairly simple to tie. And again, we're just incorporating all the same techniques that we've been using over and over and over. So we're going to do the same thing on the next fly, but this time we're going to start adding some bling. All right, so let's add some bling. We're going to kind of reach back and go over some stuff we did in the brassy, and then just take that and kind of apply it in a new way, doing a few things a little bit differently. So what we're going to do is we're going to start our thread about a bodkin width or so behind the eye. Put in our jam knot, just wrap back just into the thorax area. Next, what you're going to need is about a 7-inch piece of wire or so, something comfortable for you to work with. This is a size 12, so 7 inches works pretty good for me here, and it leaves about 1.5 inches or so left over. So I'm going to tie this in, let it roll underneath, just like we've done before. I'm going to bring this forward. All the way, and I can stop. now, just like we did the counter rib brassy, we're going to do that again here. And if you want, you can just speed this up by taking 5 or 6 turns over, cinching it back together with your nail. That works really well here on something like this because it's metal to metal, and so it wants to slide real easy. And then you can get your nice body wraps with little effort. So really kind of keep some of these things in mind as you're tying flies. Practice them. That's what we're doing here. And we want to go back to about the barb. And as you get closer to the back, you're probably going to have to make your turns a little shorter, just because you're going to start running into issues with the hook pin and the wire sliding down. It can kind of mess up the wire sometimes if it slides on you. So, okay, that's good enough. And then the wire should just hold. Or you can move it out back. All right, so let's get our tail and our backing in. So I'm going to get, 5 or 6 fibers. Just enough so that I've got this feather's going to get in my way of the camera there. Just so I've got enough to have an adequate back across the top and got some fiber coming out the back. Again, you can use pheasant tail for this. There's actually other fibers too that you can do the same thing with. So you can take the same technique and switch up the material that you want to use. So I want my tail to be about the length of my body. So I'm going to measure that up with my right thumb, right index. I'm going to transfer that distance to my left thumb, left index. I'm going to place that right on the back. And then with my right hand, I'm going to capture the front so that it's flat across the top. And now I can move my hand and adjust it up closer to the tie-in point. I'm just going to put a few wraps in. You want to make sure that this is staying on top like you want it. And we're going to wrap back to where the abdomen starts. Now, one thing you can do here is you can kind of take your thumb and press down flat, and then take your fingers on the backside and hold them in place. Okay, so I'm going to get my wire ready to engage here on this fly. Engage. Sorry, I've been watching a lot of documentaries on war, and that's the term the term they use is engage. But it's kind of true. So now we're going to remember what we did. We're going to do a loose turn over the top. And you want this first one to be right at the back so that it captures the back. So we're going to do a loose turn over. And this first wrap is usually the hardest. Sometimes it may be beneficial to actually slide the material to the direction of where your wire is. So as my wire comes up and over, just like with the thread and the wire, the thread pulling the wire down, in this case we're going to use the wire to pull the material where we want it loosely over and then tighten down. And if it shifts on you a little bit, don't over tighten your wire, and you can come back and kind of fix it. And that'll be good. Now we can start to wrap or counter wrap our body forward. Again, loose over the top. I'm sorry, not our body, our rib. Loose over the top, pull down. After the first couple of wraps, it should go a little bit smoother because you got enough wire there holding that down and locking it into place. If it starts to rotate on you a little bit, as the fly's being made or each wrap is going around, just stop and adjust the material then. Don't wait till the end. Okay. And you're looking to get 4 or 5 turns again. I'm going to bring that wire up and under to the front side. I'm going to lock that down. I'm going to tie it forward. Okay, now again, putting pressure on my, or tension on my thread. I'm just going to helicopter this thing off. And we can trim this out. Again, with stuff like this, I like fingernail clippers, but you use what you got. And this is just the dollar pair from Dollar Tree or whatever the store was. They were literally like $1. So you don't need anything fancy. Okay, next we're going to put in our legs. This is something we haven't done yet. But what we want to do is I'm going to look for some mottled fiber. And one thing I really try to do here is count the individual fibers to make sure I have an even amount so that they, whether that's 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever it is that you want to put on there, you've got an even amount coming off either side because we're going to split these. So that we've got some legs coming off. I guess we did do the legs on the last video. Sorry, it's been about a day and a half since I shot that video. I tried to shoot them all at one time, but this one's been a little bit harder to do, and with 4 flies going all at one time. So we want to get a distance of how long we want our legs. It's up to you. Some people like the legs going all the way to the back. Some people like them short. But you want to get a distance to where they're going to cover at least the thorax as they're reversed. So I mean, if you wanted to, you could put a loose wrap over and see, and just gently pull it back, or take your thumb and pull it back and see where that material is going to land going back. So that's probably a little bit longer than I want them. So I'll cut that down just a little bit, and now we can just wrap these to the back. We don't need to have like crushing tight turns here or anything like that. Just some ginger wraps going to the back will be fine. Then we want to just splay them open so that they're sitting kind of like this, and can be worked. Be careful to not overwork them. Those are delicate and they will snap. Next, let's tackle the thorax. So for the thorax, I'm going to use peacock herl. This time I'm going to use a little bit more than I did last time. Probably about 4, I think, is what I'm going to use here. So maybe I'll add in 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is just to make sure that I've got an adequate thorax and I've got my reserve in place. So I'm just going to pinch these right on top, loose wrap over, pull down, and now we can wrap our thread forward. One thing I didn't mention is we're going to leave this out back for the wing case. And I should have stopped and showed that, but you do want to, as you're wrapping this in, try to get these fibers flat like this. Mine are a little bit bunched right there, but it should be okay. All right, so one of mine already broke. Get out of here, moth. Okay, so we're going to bring our thread forward, and again I'm going to twist the herl together. Try to do this without hackle pliers because you just always run that risk, or a higher risk, of snapping a herl, at least in my experience. So I'm just going to wrap those forward, come around, twist them up some more. I know I've said it in the past, but I'm going to say it again. Don't over twist your herl. Just do enough to do a wrap and a half, 2 wraps. This just does not want to go. I may have to get my hackle pliers involved. If I can find the darn things. There they are. Too much mess on my desk. But I can't work with a clean one. I just sit there and stare at it. Like, oh, my desk is clean. I don't want to ruin that. Doesn't last very long. We get right back to ruining it pretty fast. So as we come forward, again, just bring that material. You may need to pinch it down because of your thread base underneath. So I can just hold it in place with my finger, bring it down and around to the front side. Bring it over the top to the back. Whoa. And as you pull down and keep it tight, you can really just let go of all that tension and it's going to hold. Place a wrap to the front, maybe 2, just to be double safe on this one. Put a wrap to the back. We don't even need tight wraps there. Now you can just pull down, and that completes the tight wrap. So put a loose wrap, wait till you can adjust your hands where they need to be, then pull down. Okay, so I'm going to reverse that material and start to wrap back. And once I've gone a little ways, I'm just trim all that out. Go ahead and take this hurl out. I don't need it. Now you can bring your wing case forward first if you like. You can also take your legs to the back if you like first. If you have a bodkin or a hollow pen or something, so you've got this little hole, as soon as your legs are split and you've got close to an even amount or even amount off of either side, we can take this and use it to force the material to the back. And oftentimes it'll get it seated right where you want it. That's pretty good right there. Now you can just pinch those in place. I'm just going to put a loose turn in here. I don't want to get too crazy and that's why. You can see how that rolled underneath. There we go. So you gotta watch for that. So if that happens, just back your thread off and do it again. We want to leave our thread right up behind the thorax here. We're just going to fold this over to create our wing case. If you got a little bit of hurl sticking through your wing case, that's okay. And we want to get this lined up so that it's directly over the eye again, like so. And now with tight wraps, we're going to wrap forward. And when we get to the front, again, reverse this and wrap back over that material until we get to the thorax area. And we're going to trim that out. And now, all we have left to do is to whip finish. This is where I like to wet whip. It just, this technique makes a lot of sense to me for 95% of applications. I just don't like coming back into the fly with a brush usually, unless I've got room for it and in the head and everything, and I can keep everything away. On this particular fly, I probably do, but anyway, I like to stay consistent and do things in ways that I've become accustomed to and felt comfortable with. And so there we go. So all we did was literally just manipulate the approach using all techniques that we've already covered in the previous weeks. So this is just kind of it's just a mayfly nymph, It's I'm not sure if it really has a name, but it's fun, and it'll fish well. So we're going to do one more. We're going to do it basically the same as this, but we're going to put the counter rib in. just to kind of give you the idea and show the effect that you can make using the same simple techniques and how cool of a fly you can make look, or how cool you can make a fly look using the techniques that we've had with these just simple materials. So we'll get started on that next. All right, so for the final fly this week, and by the way, next week we will only be doing 2 flies, so we're not going to be doing 4, and then week 6 we'll be just doing 1, and we're going to get things are going to change up quite a bit for week 6, and hopefully you can use week 6 as a test to kind of gauge on how much you've picked up over the course of these 6 weeks. I guess 5 weeks. So we're going to start our thread, put in our jam knot. We're going to do a double counter rib. So we want to take our black wire, tie that in, roll it underneath. Now to save and pull it back to, if you can see that, pull it back to where you started your thread. Now to save extra thread wraps in bulk here, don't go back forward. Just continue to the back. Touching turns, flat wraps, all the stuff we've been hammering away on. Okay, and go back to right about the barb, because this little front part's going to get tied in later anyway, so we don't need to build that up any more than it has to be. So again, with flat thread wraps, make sure your underbody is nice here, as nice as you can get it. The underbody is really the important part when working with wire. I think I've said that a couple of times, but I'm going to say it again because it's true. I'm just going to go back to my original start point, so you can see that I still haven't tied that front part in. Now I'm going to tie in my copper wire, again down underneath. This time I'm going to tie it in coming forward. You may need to get your nails involved to help keep it underneath. Okay, so now we're going to wrap going back. This time you're going to need to make sure you're, just like we did with the brassy, make sure you're angling your wire slightly forward. And if you need to scooch the wire together, since we have a pretty hefty thread base, just use 2 or 3 turns to do that. Don't try and go crazy with, like we did on the previous fly, with these crazy thread wraps and then scooching it together. With that thread base down, it doesn't work very well. So this part you're going to want to take your time on, making sure you get everything nice and tight. It's not a race. You know, if you have to pause these videos, pause the video. I'm not going anywhere. Okay. And my body looks pretty good as I'm doing this. I'm just, I do it kind of out of habit. But again, I also want to show that, this is, these are the techniques that make nice flies. And as we get towards the back, remember we want to meet our 2 wires up on the bottom side. You can have that black rib on the front side of your copper or the back. If it winds up that way, that's okay. The pattern doesn't change. All we're doing is adding 1 element, and we're changing the methodology just slightly. Okay. Let me get that last turn in there a little tighter. And if you got a little bit of gappage in there between your wires, don't go crazy over it. So I'm going to come down and around. that thread base, they really like to open up towards the back as you're tying them. Okay. So again, what we're going to do is add the tail. For this one, what we're going to do is we're going to change things up just a little bit. So at the tip of the turkey tail, you've got these nice little brown tips. And you can see that they're about the length of the fly, or close to that. And so we're going to use this up here just so that we can explore using the same material differently as opposed to doing it the same way all the time. And so what you may need to do is actually separate out the stem and find, I don't know, your 5 or 6 individual strands, individual barbs. You want to get them so that the tips are pretty much even. If they stay together, great, because we can always force them open later to allow them to move more in the water. And so I'm going to get my distance, just like we did before. Right thumb, right index is going to determine how far I want this to go back. I'm going to transfer the distance to my other hand. I'm going to set it right on top. This one doesn't want to set on top for me. Need to reposition it. Just like so. Loose wrap over the top. If it twists on you, that's fine. Just simply pick it up and slide it back up underneath your thread. You can do that from either side, either way you tie. Clockwise or counterclockwise. And we're just going to move this back a little bit. So we have something about like that. Now I'm going to grab both of these wires. And again, when you do this, I think I mentioned this during in the brassy video. Make sure you pull them down underneath. And you really start to straighten them out. So as we hold this in place with one loose wrap over, again, if you need to shift the material to the side that you're pulling from so that the wire takes it to the side you're going towards, you can do that. And we got a little separation in there, and that's pretty normal. Take your bodkin, scooch it together. Learn to use your tools in conjunction with one another. So as just like I did there, as my bodkin's holding it in place, my fingers are maneuvering to open it up. So by turn 2, loose over the top, pull down. You can see that with just minimal effort, we can get that tail to open up like that. Very minimal effort. Just got to practice the techniques, and those things will start to open up for you. Loose over the top, pull down. Loose over the top, pull down. And again, you're looking for 4 to 6 turns in here. If you're really struggling with getting, say, 5 turns for the double counter rip, maybe drop it down to 3 and start there. Don't be afraid to drop it down. This is not like this is what I'm telling you is the end all be all. This is just kind of the normal methodology of you want even amounts of turns on both sides. My front rib's a little short. I didn't place them quite right. If it happens, don't worry about that. It's not going to change the fishability at all. You'd have to have one real picky trout to make that change. Bring your wire to the front side. Tie it off. Hold down. Helicopter out one at a time. Okay. And now we can trim this out. Probably could have trimmed it out a while ago, but after my second or third wrap, if it's really bothering you, you can, or at least trim it down. Maybe it's a better way to state that. If it's in your way and it's bothering you. So we're going to kind of do the same thing for the legs, right? So now we have like a kind of a brownish tail, and we're going to add the brownish legs to it. So even if you've got some broken fibers in there, this will be just fine for that. You separate it out. You know, work with what you have. Pheasant tail, again, this pheasant tail works here. This is not an exclusive, like this has to be turkey. If you want something a little bit more wispy as far as fiber consistency is concerned, maybe you go with like a pheasant chest and shoulder feathers, or something. I mean, that's where the creativity part comes into play. So we just want to try to line them up so that they're relatively even. They don't have to be perfect. And we want to get a distance. And I'm going to go about 1/3 to 1/2 going forward. Again, if you want to check that, just pinch your finger at the back of the abdomen, and you can kind of take this and just bend it around, and you'll start to see where they're going to go. I don't actually fully have that there, but you can kind of see it. You'll get an idea if you need to shorten it up or extend it. So we're going to tie this in, loose over the top, put the other half wrap or so in. I'll work this back into the abdomen ever so slightly. I don't think I mentioned that on the last fly, but you want to, it's a little easier to work right back into the abdomen than it is to try to pinpoint the conjoining part of the thorax and the abdomen together. So we're just going to separate these open, pinch. You can kind of give a little gentle twist just to get them open up, move around. And again, on your final few wraps, you can take your thumb, lay that down, grab it with your opposite hand, and put your few wraps in. Now you may need to adjust the height of the positioning of your hand here, just to make sure that you're getting that material directly on top and it's in line. Okay. And again, to finish this fly, we're just going to use some peacock herl. If you wanted to use a little bit of dubbing here, maybe particularly ice dub, just because of how kind of blingy this fly is, I'll tell you what, let's just go ahead and use some ice dub just to change things up. Since it's sitting here anyway. I've got the Simperfly super long dubbing there. I can cut it a few times to make it not so super long. But you know, if you want to change, if you want to use peacock herl, great, use peacock herl. That's really what the pattern was designed for. This is really just kind of a knockoff of a Barry Ward Clark pattern, and it's not a far-fetched knockoff either. It's basically the same tying methodology and everything else. We just changed up some material, so I want to make sure I give him a little bit of credit for that. There was an article that he wrote doing this fly. I forgot what he called it. I should have looked it up. So I apologize for that. But so now we're just going to add, in this case, our dubbing. But again, use peacock herl or whatever. Whatever you feel is the best. Whatever you think is going to work the best for you. Or maybe you just want to practice something different. So I've got way too much there. I really like this Simperfly ice dub. and I think I mentioned this before too. The only downside for me is like the fibers are so long. It's really more of like a streamer type of ice dub, which is cool because I'm not sure there's really anything else like that on the market. Again, we're gonna just take our legs, make sure they're separated, fold them to the back. We want them slightly down or off to the side. And you can kind of adjust everything while you've got your little tool. You can do this with your fingers too. The better you get, you can just take it, sweep everything back, and you'll, majority of the time you'll get what you want. All right, come on, feather. Get in place. Get where I want you. Okay, and now we can start to wrap this guy going back. Always watch for the twists and those legs going to the rear. And twisting down underneath. Something like that. So, always be mindful of that. Okay. Now we can just simply... Then you come back just a fuzz more. Now we just simply bring our wing case forward, just like we did on the last one. Loose wrap over the top. We're going to tie this in going forward. If your thread slides to right behind the eye before you make an additional wrap, just lift up on your material and your thread at the same time. And you can literally, if you can see that, you can literally get that material to seat right where you want it. With just minimal tension on your bobbin. You can adjust everything. And now we can come forward. And now come back, just like we've done, to finish the fly. So again, obviously I'm encouraging you practicing these things because this is how you're, literally we're taking very few materials and all of a sudden now we're starting to make kind of like designer style flies, which I think intimidates a lot of new tiers to some degree because they're like, I can't tie that. And the fact is you can. You absolutely can. You just need to know a few techniques. Techniques type make patterns. If that makes sense. Learn the techniques, you can tie anything you want. Put our wet whip in. Got a hair trapped in there. That's not uncommon for my desk because I've got so much crap just floating around. I'll live with it. And we'll just trim that out. And so there you go. There we go. If I can do it, you can do it. I promise. So, well, thanks for sticking with us. That's the end of week 4. I know we packed a lot into this this session, and especially the first 4 weeks. We packed a lot in, going from just basic to tying this in 4 weeks. I know it seems like it's a huge jump, and I'm trying to hammer home saying it's not that big of a jump. You can do this. If you can tie these little basic flies that we were doing, then you just pay attention and practice the techniques that we've gone over. You can tie this in a very short period of time. Maybe it takes you a month or 2, something along those lines, but you can do it. I'm fairly confident in that. I say fairly because I don't know everybody that's following along, but and tying's not for everybody. So, and by all means, this is not the end all be all either. So, if you can't do this and you're more proficient at spinning deer hair and tying bass poppers, then hey, more power to you. So, anyway, that's it. That's the completion of week 4. Again, thanks for staying with us, and really appreciate you guys and that follow along. And I've seen quite a bit of improvement here in the last few weeks, which from some people who have been around for even a while, which is great. It's fantastic. I definitely know it helps hone my skills. Tying just going over the fundamentals again really helps me dive into other things that I want to do, and helps me recapture some of the ideas of the fundamentals that I may put to the wayside because I'm trying to do other things. So it's always good to fall back on these little simple principles. So other than that, happy tying. Take care. Like, subscribe, and share if you haven't. You can always find me over at Fly Tying for Beginners on Facebook if you find this video outside of that. And you guys have a great week. Enjoy your weekend. Have a great week. And we will see you for week 5.